Hello everyone, Max here with Fiction Rant to bring you part 8 of my Halo vs. Mass Effect matchup series. This part is the long-awaited final showdown. As mentioned in the intro section, I'll be considering this matchup in a few years of war. Those being 1v1 ship, fleet vs. fleet, 1v1 soldier, army vs. army, and then who wins in a galactic conquest scenario where it's a fresh galaxy where everything works, and both sides start with similar amounts of territory. As a reminder, this is the Halo UNSC with the support of the Sangheili Alliance set around the time of Halo Infinite. So the UNSC has started to improve some ships with shields and Forerunner tech that allows pinpoint slip space jumps and such, but the bulk of the fleet is limited to a tech level more similar to the middle of the war. They also have access to some number of Covenant ships, but certainly not the bulk of the numbers that constitute the Loyalist Covenant faction. Basically, if they would reasonably actually align with each other in the Halo universe, I'm allowing them to be on the same team. If they still hate each other, then they won't be teaming up. So yeah, the UNSC will not be getting the support of the Brutes. They'll be matched up against the combined Citadel forces from Mass Effect, with the assumption that Shepard did a really good job and managed to recruit the Quarians and Geth, cured the Genophage, and even recruited the Rachni, though I'll be downplaying their contributions. Starting with ship combat, I'll be trying to pit the best of the best versus the best of the best, so in this case, that will be the UNSC Infinity from Halo versus the Destiny Ascension from Mass Effect. Both are big, scary dreadnoughts from their respective universes that are both pinnacles of cutting-edge technology. Here, though, is where things get a bit awkward, since the Infinity is super well documented with dimensions, armament, defenses, all nice and laid out. Meanwhile, the Destiny Ascension is just described in vague terms. What we do get is that the ship has almost as much firepower as the rest of the Asari fleet combined, that it utilizes Mass Effect fields to reduce its own effective mass so it can accelerate and maneuver like a much smaller ship, that it's roughly 4 times the size of the most massive human ships, and that it is equipped with Guardian defenses, which consist of computer-targeted turrets which are used for point defense against fighters and missiles, and basically a lot of human input, well, Asari input in this case, to actually operate. In Mass Effect 1, Destiny Ascension is a priority target for the entire Geth fleet during the Battle of the Citadel. If you decide to go help, much of the human fleet is lost trying to protect the Dreadnought, but it does in fact survive, despite taking a hell of a pummeling. By Mass Effect 3, it has received shielding and weapon upgrades to help counter the Reaper threat, including the Thanix cannon in the weapons section. Here's the thing though, looking through the Mass Effect wiki, it stated that dreadnoughts in general are up to 1 kilometer in length. Infinity is about 5 kilometers in length. This means that while they're both definitely absolutely massive vessels, the scale of things in Halo is just on a different level. All that said, both ships have shields capable of resisting attacks by the other, and I think that kinetic barriers used by Mass Effect ships in general would be particularly effective against UNSC MAC guns, but again, the scale here gets insane. Infinity is sporting 8 front-facing MAC guns, in addition to a ton of smaller guns and missile launchers, and of course nukes. So while I think the Destiny Ascension would put up some fight since it's noted as being so durable, I don't think even it could hold up to that kind of firepower, so round 1 goes to Halo, with the Infinity taking out the Destiny Ascension. Moving on to the fleet battle, as I pointed out in my numbers section, the most ships we get to see assembled by the UNSC is about 300, with an additional 300 orbital defense platforms, which really only factor in a defensive fight against a well-entrenched target. So, if you're attacking one of their home worlds, then they'll get orbital platforms. If it's in neutral territory, you don't get those. The Sangheili Alliance would be able to contribute about 60 ships, based on what I was picking up from the games. So we're talking in the range of 350 to 400 ships being available for a given combat. Keep in mind that even as of Halo Infinite, the resources at the UNSC have been drastically depleted due to their war, so in terms of sheer numbers, they really don't have a ton of wiggle room, especially since the Battle for Earth that started Halo 2 involved most of the ships that the UNSC had left at that point of the war. Meanwhile, the most ships we get to see mustered in a single battle by the Citadel factions is around 900 ships from the standard factions, and, since we're involving the Geth as well, we can only estimate the number of ships that they contribute, though according to the wiki, and I take their estimate with a massive grain of salt since it seems to defy what we see in the games, a single Geth fleet consists of between 5,000 and 10,000 ships. So if they contributed only a single fleet to the fight, the numbers would jump to around 6,000 ships at the low end. For the sake of argument, though, let's go ahead and assume that they contribute about half as many ships as all the other Citadel factions just to keep the numbers under control. This still puts the Mass Effect side at 1,350 ships, all of which have kinetic barriers and all of which have weaponry capable of inflicting plenty of damage on UNSC ships. Particularly the unshielded make up the bulk of the UNSC armada. Remember that the Infinity having shields at all is an anomaly, not the rule. All that to say, even without involving the Geth in the fleet battle, I'd still give this fight to the Citadel factions since they outnumber the combined Halo factions about 3-1. And just like in the War with the Covenant, being able to soak a couple hits with shields before taking hull damage makes a huge difference in a fight, so both fleets should be able to punch in similar weight classes due to Mass Effect fields providing way more power per pound of ship than the UNSC, and the UNSC just builds really big and powerful ships. So yeah, the smaller ships won't be able to punch quite as hard as the UNSC ships, but not like different ballpark levels. But meanwhile, the Citadel ships all have kinetic barriers, which means they can all take, at least from normal comparable sized ships, they can all take a hit or two, and then those kinetic barriers will fail, and you can destroy them. You get a big enough MAC gun, and that won't matter as much. But the point stands that UNSC ships really can't take that many hits because they are not shielded for the most part, but Citadel ships can. They're shielded. I'll note, though, that the Sangheili Alliance ships would instantly become priority targets because their plasma weaponry and particle beams would basically totally ignore the protection provided by kinetic barriers, and while the Solaris armor that we get to see in Mass Effect 2 would provide some protection against ships just catching fire and burning up after a single hit, it's not equipped on all ships, so the extra protection would be spotty at best. So yeah, fleet versus fleet goes to Mass Effect, even though I contend that each ship from Halo side would be a force to contend with. They just don't have that many ships to use. Moving on to 1v1 Soldier, I'm pitting the best of the best from each side against each other again, so from Halo, that's either Master Chief or the Arbiter, and I'll consider each with standard gear, which is why I'm considering both separately matters, versus a biotic Krogan Commando. So I will justify this because they do show up in the books, they are very rare, and they're freaking terrifying. I'll give my conclusion first and then justification. Versus the Chief, the Krogan wins. Versus the Arbiter wins. Here's why. First of all, the Krogan is insanely durable to the point where, even unshielded, their head plating can deflect bullets. And, as pointed out in the weapons and defenses sections I did earlier, normal bullets like from Chief's most of his arsenal, assault rifle, pistol, whatever, they're basically useless against Mass Effect kinetic barriers. They just don't put out that much energy. Meanwhile, the standard kit for Krogan would involve a rapid-fire mini railgun, which would quickly overwhelm any shields and armor that's in the Halo universe, hunters aside, and then shred their armor. And that's not even considering specialty ammo types, which freeze targets solid or set them on fire. Or I've gone into a lot of explanation in prior videos, but it bears repeating. The guns in Mass Effect are insane because they get to ignore the laws of physics. For any ballistic weapon, force equals mass times acceleration. So normally, if you have a given amount of recoil, so that's your force coming back into you because you're firing something out the front that's much less massive but going really quick, you can mess around with the mass and acceleration numbers all you want and nothing changes as long as that force stays the same in terms of your energy applied to the target. So you can have a small bullet going really fast or a heavy bullet going slower. As long as the force remains the same, you can do whatever you want with those numbers. But Mass Effect fields allow you to cheat. You get to reduce the mass of your projectile while it's inside of your gun, so for a given amount of recoil from a shot, you could be delivering 10 or even 100 times more energy to your target. And kinetic barriers actually resist that kind of firepower from machine guns that are firing hundreds of rounds a second. So yeah, while it's true that the projectiles from Mass Effect weaponry are absolutely tiny, the fact that they're traveling so freaking fast puts them in a whole new category of destruction and puts the protection provided by kinetic barriers into its own league as well. And that's before we consider that the Krogan Commando in question also has biotic powers, so he can take a heck of a hit and give a heck of a hit, and also use what basically amounts to magic at the same time. Be that to toss Chief around like a ragdoll, or just charge him so fast that even the augmented Spartan in his power armor can't possibly react fast enough. Remember, Mass Effect fields allow you to do things like mess with gravity. Chief can't move that fast if he's literally weightless. Even if we let Chief be augmented by Cortana, it wouldn't make that much of a difference unless Cortana repair, but that'd be fight unfair. Standard kit on both sides. yeah, if you give Cortana time to plan, she's like Batman. She can beat, but you need that time. On the other hand, against the Arbiter, the tables turn. This is for a couple reasons: plasma weaponry and active camo. Kinetic barriers do basically nothing against energy weapons, and plasma weaponry absolutely burns hot enough to penetrate Krogan armor, a couple hits. They still do work a little bit. I say basically nothing. The basically is very important. The Geth do use energy weapons. They're sort of a variant on plasma weapons, and your kinetic barriers can actually resist them in the games, but they don't resist them all that well. Those plasma weapons are super duper. So combine that with the active camo, which all but guarantees that the Arbiter gets to hit first, and the fact that his standard kit includes a plasma rifle and a plasma sword, and unless the Arbiter is a fool, the fight would just consist of him going invisible, pulling out his sword, and taking out the Krogan in one shot, no problem. In fact, the kinetic barriers would be doubly useless against plasma swords because not only are they energy weapons, which pretty much ignore the kinetic barriers, but they also don't provide any protection at all against slow-moving targets. So you can walk up to somebody with kinetic barrier protection and just punch them, but you couldn't shoot them. So yeah, who wins in a soldier versus soldier battle depends entirely on what kind of soldier are you talking about. Against most things UNSC, a Krogan commando would be a highly, highly effective force. I think they'd probably even be able to shrug off a rocket hit, though, a Spartan laser would still win. Energy weapons, gotta love them. Army versus army is an awkward question, since both sides largely utilize squad tactics, though both are certainly capable of fielding traditional armies. That said, it's hard for me to rationalize giving this to the Halo factions for a few reasons. For one, everyone in Mass Effect is shielded using kinetic barriers, so most weaponry used by most of the Halo forces, in this case, the Marines, they just wouldn't work. If this were a matchup between the Loyalist Covenant forces and the Mass Effect forces, this would be a very different fight. But as it is, the Sangheili Alliance doesn't have that many soldiers to contribute. Sure, all elites would be plenty formidable in combat, but grunts would just get shredded by Mass Effect weaponry and have very little protection against it. And while their plasma weaponry would definitely be useful against the Citadel forces, it still wouldn't amount to one-shotting because Mass Effect armor and kinetic barriers do provide a degree of protection against such weaponry. So, yeah, you'd still have to hit every Mass Effect soldier a few times to get through their protection. Meanwhile, all of the grunts would just get mown down by hypervelocity rapid-fire rounds, and the elites would take a little more effort, but they'd probably go down expensively each one. Marines would be useless. Spartans would be fairly effective, but there just aren't that many Spartans. And yeah, let me reiterate, there just aren't that many Covenant forces available from the Sangheili Alliance. They are a splinter rebel group. Taking a look at ground tanks and such, yeah, the Mass Effect side really doesn't show us much of it. I mean, the Mako is a force to be, we get to see gathers and stuff. There's definitely a lot more vehicles present in the Halo games, but something I want to point out is that biotics would absolutely wreak havoc on UNSC and Covenant vehicles alike. And while biotics are relatively uncommon among humanity, in the grand scheme of things, and particularly in the military, they're not that rare, especially considering that every Asari is naturally biotic. So yeah, you think it's impressive that Master Chief can flip a Jeep or tank over while in his power armor? Well, this Asari girl over here can do the same thing at a distance with her brain. Finally, the Galactic Conquest matchup. This is a matchup that would take years and years of fighting back and forth, and that means a few things right away. First of all, both factions would quickly find and begin utilizing mass relays. They're not Halo subspace drive is way faster than normal FTL for the Citadel factions, but for most ships, the Mass Effect relays are still faster. I think Infinity, with its onboard Forerunner artifacts and tech, would possibly be faster than even a Mass Effect relay, but that certainly wouldn't apply to everything. Innovation would absolutely play a big role on both sides. For the Halo side, any captured tech would quickly become their tech, as they could just hand it over to Covenant engineers, or the Haragok, and they'd be able to reverse it basically. In addition, UNSC Smart AI would be capable of making improvements over any adapted tech. Unfortunately for the Halo side, there just really wouldn't be that much in the way of tech that would actually be useful to them right away. Sure, equipping Marines with kinetic barriers and being able to use Mass Effect fields would be a huge boon, but in terms of immediate benefit, the big thing in their way would just be the expense of it all. Mass Effect fields require Element 0. which requires locating and extracting a relatively rare material, and even when you have it, it takes years of exposure for people to start being born with natural biotic abilities. So, at least at the beginning of the war, the main technological benefits would be just outfitting Marines with new mini railgun. And yeah, they could equip everybody with kinetic barriers, but again, they're actually quite expensive. And, in Halo, UNSC could have equipped everybody with personal shielding or, power armor of some kind that's just not as powerful as the Spartan stuff, but it's just prohibitively expensive to do so they didn't. Given a decade or so of time to integrate the technology, I think the main thing we would see is that the UNSC would build far more numerous but smaller ships, or possibly even bigger ships, that just utilize Mass Effect fields to be relatively light, artificially light, so that they would be accelerate and maneuver faster, while having weapons that hit even harder than the ones that they already have. Meanwhile, on the Citadel side, early encounters with UNSC and Covenant ships would quickly demonstrate that the Mass Effect ships are very much out of their league in engagements involving similar numbers of ships, leaving them to have to resort to either committing disproportionately numerous ships to every fight, or doing something to help level the technological field. Enter the Salarians, Quarians, and Geth. One of the first major targets that they would go after would be countering the UNSC AI. Geth would probably see the AIs as kind of like kindred spirits, thing, and probably want to make friends or something, but the Salarians, with the help of the Quarians, would probably do something dastardly like learn about rampancy and then try to induce it in any smart AI they encounter, making them go crazy and attack their own people. Meanwhile, the Krogan. Assuming that Shepard, does the Paragon thing, which I am assuming, by the end of Mass Effect 3, the genophage is cured, which means that the Krogan would be able to produce near endless numbers of powerful soldiers. Remember here, Krogan are massive. Like, they're not as big as brutes, but they're still really bulky and really durable. For perspective, in Halo, Ungoi, or grunts, reproduce super quick, having 5 to 12 young per clutch, which mature in 5 to 8 years. This contributes to them being used as cannon fodder by the Covenant. There's just a lot of them available. Krogan females, on the other hand, are known to produce up to 1,000 fertilized eggs per year, which during the genophage, which was keeping that in check, didn't actually lead to that much population growth, since only about 1 in 1,000 eggs would actually be viable. But post-genophage, you're looking at hundreds of baby Krogan every year for every female. And remember that from the unique advantages side, when I was talking about Krogan, they also don't require that much resources to actually survive. Like, the 50-gallon drum of water can keep an entire colony going for 10 years. So this is a hyper-efficient reproduction process. So in terms of ability to actually spread across the galaxy, the Citadel would have a near-endless legion of Krogan to act as soldiers and workforce. They'd also have the Geth, who can simply manufacture more units as need arises. So despite their FTL being a lot slower than UNSC slipspace drive, it's still fast enough, and so the Citadel forces would just be able to capture and develop territory exponentially faster. Sure, the Halo factions would be able to spread out farther to separated systems, but their coverage would basically just be spots. A lot of nothing colony, and, a couple clusters popping up here and there as their ships just jump around. But they'd be limited horribly by manpower restrictions over the years. People just can't reproduce that fast. Likewise, all the other Covenant species, with grunts being able to reproduce super quick, but even their reproduction pales in comparison to the Krogan and Geth rate of producing new soldiers. And the Geth in particular are just limited by manufacturing capacity, which in a fresh galaxy for the taking might as well be infinite. I'd say that the Halo factions would have a shot at winning a Galactic conquest scenario if they just blitzed in and won quickly, but they simply wouldn't be capable of doing so. The reason that humanity held out as long as they did during the Human-Covenant War was because of the Cole Protocol, which helped humanity hide from the Covenant. That was their best strategy to survive. They couldn't win the war, and really they didn't win any significant battles either, so the strategy was just, if they can't find us, they can't exterminate us. I think that given time and the opportunity to refit all their ships with Mass Effect fields in mind, the UNSC ships would become absolutely insane in combat, especially since they'd be able to integrate pinpoint accurate slipspace jumps, shields, and a mix of ballistic and energy weapons into all their ships. But The Citadel factions and their industrial capacity as a result of the sheer numbers of people available, not to mention their own ability to innovate and adapt to new threats and create their own energy weapons and copy what the Halo side are using, they just would overwhelm the Halo faction. Especially if the Solarians and Quarians manage to figure out how to induce rampancy and smart AIs or otherwise counter the threat that they pose, the UNSC would be in really big trouble. Don't forget that in Halo Infinite, spoilers for anybody who didn't play cares, Cortana, having gone rampant, not only managed to lead a successful attack against Earth, but wiped the UNSC headquarters and the city of Sydney off the face of the planet after commandeering some Forerunner tech. So yeah, if the Citadel factions managed to mess with the smart AIs, they'd either have to all be taken offline, big advantage taken away right there, or the AIs themselves would gut the UNSC. And don't be mistaken here, the Quarians and Solarians would not only be capable of doing such a thing, but they would be inclined to do such a thing. Granted, that kind of innovation is a bit of a stretch. I'm getting into some pretty speculative type stuff here. I could very easily make the same assertion that, well, see, the Halo side would just, find some Forerunner tech, and stuff and things. So, granted, that's an even bigger stretch, but, I get. The main thing that comes down to is that the Halo faction should just be overwhelmed by the incoming tide of Citadel faction vessels and resources that bring to bear. So yeah, the Mass Effect side, the Citadel factions, they would win a quest scenario. But what do you all think? Am I missing something that I really shouldn't? Am I still not giving the Volus enough credit? Should I re-record my entire video while pretending to be an L-Core? Let me know in the comments below, and until next time, live long and prosper, and may the Force be with you.